这个习惯，每天早上10分钟，一直到6。
5000年的历史中，一杯苦难的多，而以难发明的却只有一例，便是明太祖朱元璋。常言道，天下大事，合久必分，分久必合，而能够扫清风乱，重归一统的雄风，往往是在北方起家，一杯苦难。这其中固然有南方对土地的开发利用和北方的优势，但南方缺马以及不善骑战的问题同样不可忽视。骑兵在战争中的用处可太大了，骑兵甚至可以挺起胸膛狠狠地吹。那么，唯一一个以南伐北再到华夏的大明是如何对抗蒙元的骑兵集团呢？答案其实很简单，用魔法打败魔法。大家好，这里是冷兵器研究所进击的骑兵系列栏目第2期。这一期我们就来聊聊明朝初年是如何拥有一支能够横扫蒙元的骑兵部队的。朱元璋虽然是在南方起家的，但其实并不缺马。蒙古人征服中原，建立元帝国以后，就热情地投入到四处养马的事业当中。他们在华北地区开展了系统的战马驯养工作，大同、太原、真定、青州、胶州、沧州、邯郸等地都建立了不小的马场，甚至打破了马场与北方的界限，在南方找到了一块相对清凉、干燥又方便补充大量淡水和食盐的地方建立马场，这就是福州马场，位置就在朱元璋起家地淮西。不过，想要组建一支骑兵部队，不仅要解决马的问题，还要解决人的问题。士兵要是没接触过战马，不会骑马，没有骑兵作战的经验，那是很难组建优秀的骑兵部队的。很多时候，南方政权不是没资源组建骑兵，是没这个能力，知道吗？但是对于朱元璋来说，这并不是什么问题。元帝国自忽必烈起就忙着打内战，经常抽调汉家儿郎北上驱走征服蒙古人，这让南方的汉民也积累了丰富的骑兵从业经验，甚至是指挥经验。淮西人并不缺乏骑兵必备的军事素质。朱元璋起事之初，麾下就有不少骑兵高手，比如大将彭玉春、外省刘忠和淮西24将军副师，都是骑兵大将。常遇春曾在洛水之北单骑冲锋，一人单挑20多个蒙古骑兵，率军大破脱阴铁木儿的5万。李文忠在南方时就喜欢玩骑兵冲锋，曾经率千骑横突敌阵，甚至横竖率数十骑兵直接破军冲阵。李文忠在之后的北伐蒙古草原时，在阿普顿河遭遇蒙古优势兵力合围，他和古时更是靠着骑兵的决死冲锋反杀成功，大破元太师蛮子哈拉仗。即便有着不错的骑兵技术，朱元璋还在作战中俘虏不少骑兵，缴获了不少战马装备，并也从少数民族地区朝鲜等地购买战马，韩信点兵多多益善了局势。不过也正是这些努力，让朱元璋在淮西马队的基础上打造出了强大的明军骑兵。根据记载，朱元璋特别重视军事训练，要求骑兵是既能骑射又能冲锋的同时明军骑兵配备的是4到5米的冲枪，90到120斤的硬弓，护身用的盾牌副武器为腰刀，甲胄成分相对复杂，既有中国传统的扎甲，也有蒙元流行的锁子甲和木棉铁甲。不仅士兵装备齐全，战马也装备有金属制的锭铁赤马甲及中国传统的巨装甲旗。因此，朱元璋的骑兵规模或许不大，但战斗力相当强悍，是绝对的精锐。在南方与陈友谅、张世宗的作战中，往往能占据优势。但明军骑兵在南方虽然很强，在北方就有点不够看了，数量太少。泸州马场是中原众多马场的一部，蒙古骑兵的数量优势非常大，数量问题无解，就只能在其他的办法相解。因此，明军骑兵特别重视于步兵的配合，也就是步坦协同作战。朱元璋麾下的明军重步兵非常优秀，与战术消极的宋朝重步兵，14世纪末的明朝重步兵具有非常高昂的士气以及主动攻击的精神。根据《太祖实录》与《国初事记》记载，明军步兵非常重视长枪的使用和训练。朱元璋要求，凡百户无军功而积劳升职者，一律要通过笔试武艺来确定是否军功。在明朝早期的步兵作战中，100名士兵中，长枪步兵占到了40%，此外还有10%的火中手。他们在中原战场上面对蒙古骑兵屡屡得胜。1367年，明军名将傅有德面对元军骑兵，2000明军以长矛战阵发起进攻，光是正面攻败元军骑兵，还俘获了元将和270余人，获马500余匹。明初的进战步兵因此有着极大的威名。 虽然武兵优秀，但高贵的骑兵也不是只会在旁边喊666的打着挂架，他们同样敢打。在公元1380年蔡家庄之战，40名明军骑兵就敢对1000名蒙古骑兵发起攻击。打赢当然是不现实的，毕竟这不是40个旅，但也成功的拖延住了敌人。明军步兵就靠着骑兵争取到的时间高速行军，包抄蒙古军后方，形成两面包架阵势，打胜蒙古骑兵，并且杀死了他们的同伴。史书虽然没有记载此战明军士兵的具体阵型，但可以确认明军骑兵拥有高超的战术能力和冲锋敢战的精神，步兵也拥有高速机动的能力，攻击性极强，并且非常重视以进退熟练为始终的发切，严密到蒙古骑兵无法找到可以冲击的破绽。可以说，朱元璋拥有当时世界上最优秀的骑兵与步兵，也正是凭借着这支军队，朱元璋实现了克服公元、再造华夏的伟业。一支小规模的精锐骑兵配合着精锐步兵，可以在中原大地纵横驰骋。但想北上草原横扫残垣，那就力不为难了。草原上只有骑兵才是硬道理，只有大量的战马、大量的骑兵才能实现鱼儿海大业。对此，咱们农民出身的老祖血脉猛士奉天二祖的朱元璋决定养马，大量的养马。洪武年间，朱元璋培养战马的制度被称为马户制或者驸马制，这是一种将战马分散至边户培养的制度。这种制度与宋朝不为类似，本质是在没有足够牧场条件下的折中措施。等到被草原帝国的作者勒内格鲁塞称为明朝最好战的皇帝朱棣上台，明朝的马政又得到了进一步的提升。不同于洪武年间的散养，朱棣更倾向于集中养马。永乐4年9月，朱棣设立陕西甘肃2院马司，依仗洪武之势。此后又陆续在陕西甘肃2院马司下设8间40余院，之后又设立北京辽东2院马司，规制与陕西甘肃的院马司交互。至此，明朝4个院马司在明朝北方从东北到西北连成一片，形成了一个完整的战马繁育养殖体系。永乐13年12月，朱棣又在北京地区根据每户的丁额户推行民间养马。永乐14年9月，朱棣接受大臣杨弼建议，百姓甚至屯田军事，只要参与养马就能减免田赋。如此一来，这种多人分养一马的民间养马政策是在北方地区全面推展开来。到永乐15年9月，这一政策推广到中国。到了永乐22年，明帝国已经拥有军马173万匹。如此众多的军马，让明初的骑兵数量快速提升，而且质量上敢打敢拼，让朱棣有了亲征漠北草原的底气。另一方面，朱元璋朱棣父子也是世界上最早意识到科技改变战争模式的军事统治者。有没有对蒙元将帅说出那句经典的大人时代变了不清楚，但他们毫无疑问地做出了决定，也要大力发展火器了。为了对抗蒙古骑兵，明军发展出了一种被称为手铳的单兵重型火轮枪。根据文物显示，洪武年间的单兵铜火铳长度一般在32到45厘米之间，口径在2到3厘米之间，使用重33到110克的铁质弹。虽然现代枪械不一定是口径大就威力强，但是在明初，口径大就意味着弹丸更大，装药量也更大，威力自然就更强。使用铁弹丸也是比铅弹丸有着更强的炮打能力，实战价值高得多。而且明初的火铳已经在考虑武器气密性的问题，要求使用合口铁弹丸。除了火枪外，还有火炮。目前可知的洪武年最大铁炮长1米，重将近900斤，火炮内径达到51厘米。朱棣则在此基础上技术改革，根据镇守云南的名将穆英的成功经验，组建成建制的火器部队神机营。技术上，永乐手铳在钥匙的火门外加入了一个长方形的曲面火轮盖，可以转动，以防止风吹侵入钥匙。不仅如此，还增加了马子，一种装填火药后储实火药的附件，使之更为紧密封闭，极大地增加了火铳的威力和射程，并且结合明军步骑攻击性强、火器众多的特长，创立了著名的永乐枪阵分为3种结构：神机枪队57人排队枪毙杀伤敌人，弓箭队57人承担肉搏和射击任务，马队57人负责冲锋狙击出其之人。此时的明军很有可能就是不逊于后世殖民者军队的战斗力。在具体的骑兵建设中，朱棣还做了2件事。第一个是成立专业化的骑兵部队3000营。3000营出于永乐年间朱棣设立的随驾3000马队官军，抽调蒙古一兵和各军精锐， 从永乐12年北征上河巨鹿来看，这随驾3000马队冠军是朱棣的亲卫骑兵部队，并且在永乐8年、12年的2次北征中发挥了很大的作用。永乐8年的第1次北征中，朱棣在5月初9日以轻骑每人携带20日干粮，以投降的鞑靼人为向导，追击鞑靼可汗本雅失里。大军则由秦明侯皇领金有资统帅，继续驻扎在印拉河，并且在河畔守住沙湖镇。然而，当明军在5月12日进至古尔扎河时，本雅失里已经离开了那里。5月10日，明军终于在当年成吉思汗的国姓之地霍难河追上了本雅失里。明军立即占据有利地形，然后居高临下发动骑兵冲锋，大败鞑靼军队，报了当年屈辱的仇。逃走的本雅失里最终为瓦剌首领马哈姆所杀，退出了历史舞台。在击败本雅失里后，5月22日下诏班师的同时，朱棣又以精锐骑兵向东搜索，追击鞑靼太师阿卜开。6月初9日，明军从飞云阁继续出发，行军20余里后，前哨终于发现了阿卜开的踪迹。朱棣立即让诸将严阵以待，自己则率数十骑登山以观察敌情。大军继续前进，随即发现了隐蔽在山谷中的阿卜开所。阿卜开遣人来见朱棣，请求归降。朱棣自信地说：“乍来归降，真以待之。”明军又继续前进了数十里，之后以精锐骑兵摧毁了蒙古的军阵。明军其后又回去和黄墨城两度打败鞑靼，终于使阿卜开远遁，并且在相当的时期内失去了明军对阵的力量。可以看出，朱棣的战法是以随驾3000马队冠军为合兵的精锐骑兵进行长距离机动，寻找敌人主力进行决战。自李世民之后，朱棣可以称得上是骑兵指挥艺术的第二人。在这之后，这随驾3000马队冠军正式分化出来，成为日后明军3大营之3000营。朱棣在骑兵建设上做的第2件事是成立神机营，建立专业的火器部队，并将其运用到骑兵战中。根据宣德3年记载，永乐时神机营编制，神机营设左少右少，左野右野，共军11右5及随驾马队冠军。说明神机营是有使用火器的骑兵部队。永乐12年的呼兰湖石门之战，根据大臣金有资在后北征中的记载，此战5月27日打响，前方刘江开始追击瓦剌，并于6月初3日率先开战，斩瓦剌数十人。6月初7日，明军从亚萨出发，中午进抵呼兰温室。在这里，朱棣终于找到了已经摆好阵势的地方，因为瓦剌此后就准备在这里与明军决战，因此他们占据了有利地形，并高速。而且瓦剌军战绩是中亚，所以以甲骑巨装和大量优秀的战斧而闻名。朱棣决定身先士卒，主动向占据优势的瓦剌军发动冲锋。此战中，明军的火铳部队发挥了作用。然而战斗还没有结束，瓦剌军虽然被明军密集的火铳击退，但他们很快重新集结，再度占据阵地。明军此前已经获得了阶段性胜利，此时自然不甘示弱，继续进攻。瓦剌军则且战且退。当天日暮时分，朱棣决心结束战斗，于是投入了精锐的火器骑兵。瓦剌方面也知道明军的意图，于是再度推进决战，结果被打得大败。朱棣率军一路追至鲁拉河才守军。永乐大帝正是依托明军对于骑兵的建设，连续5次亲征漠北草原，先后取得霍难河之战、飞云河之战、回曲津之战、呼兰湖石门之战、曲里尔河之战的胜利，重创蒙古鞑靼乌央哈维拉特3大汗国及其后人对瓦剌国的惨败总结到，维拉特几万人战死，几乎是灭顶之灾。在14世纪末到15世纪初的世界范围内，明帝国初期拥有可靠的、富有攻击精神的双重弓子重骑兵，这些骑兵大量装备重型弹枪作为单兵远射武器，有着比同时代欧洲更强的专业化近战步兵水火炮弹，还配备了大量的重型火炮。可以说，当时的明军是世界范围内的最强大的之一。一直以来，汉唐之后的中原骑兵在人们的印象中往往数量稀少，还缺乏远程打击能力。但明初的骑兵不仅规模庞大，更善用火器，比起欧洲的铁皮罐头，他们更灵活、更先进、更强大。中国古代的劳动人民从不缺乏智慧，更不缺少能工巧匠与发明家。包括从来不是将士服，而是傲慢与偏见。无论什么时代，那些为了国家安全奉献一生的人都值得我们尊敬。而我们更要谨记：好战必亡，亡战必危。好了，本期视频到此结束。喜欢视频的朋友们来个3连，我们下期再见。
London hotels to Paris apartments.
提及重骑兵，大家首先想到的可能就是骑士身披重甲，正面冲阵破敌了。确实， 重骑兵指的就是骑兵本身具有良好防御，高用冲击方式作战的骑兵。但在重骑兵为大类之下，还可以根据战马的防御水平分为突骑兵、半巨装骑兵以及巨装骑兵为3类。但是和文艺作品不同，历史中出现的突骑兵其实大多数都是类似之前视频讲过的大装骑兵，是突骑兵或者半巨装骑兵。真正轻视溜冰以人马具全甲的超重装骑兵部队其实并不多，比如中国南北朝时期的甲骑巨装、拜占庭的超重装骑兵、两宋时期的金国骑兵。大家好，这里是冷兵器研究所总结的骑兵系列栏目第5期。这一期我们来聊聊金国的敌人和他们的对手岳家军北魏军骑兵。在古典时代，一个国家骑兵部队最理想的状态是各类骑兵分工合作，有人马具装的超重装骑兵负责守中间，有马匹披甲但人员有良好防护的快速骑兵负责其他各类灵活的战术任务，有轻装的游骑兵在外围当指挥。但理想是美好的，现实骑兵太美。在长达2000年的历史中，机械马匹虽然稀薄，重骑兵文化非常丰富的地区和国家才有可能努力冲击这种队伍。最典型的例子就是我们上期讲过的大东营。不过，虽然理想配置是一辆咋达到的真实，但在实际自然艺术化中，军事成功获得的财富被数十轻骑兵转化为重骑兵，从而形成两种兼备的状态。金国骑兵的崛起与提督刘的诞生有关系。晋朝的王室完颜谷早期只是女真主仆之一，而女真主仆常受到契丹人的压迫阶级。完颜谷在当时则是契丹人的中将，是辽国在当地的代理人。女真国共骑兵反辽时，完颜谷就力挺大辽，立下了不少功劳，也获得了辽国的信任。战后，完颜谷手里还被辽国认为圣女真节度使。完颜也借此捞了不少红利，积累了丰富的军事经验和大量的军事装备。辽国虽然信任这个小老弟，但是也知道铠甲是珍贵的军事资源，仍然严格禁止私藏铠甲。因此，女真完颜谷在建国之前极其缺乏甲胄，甚至更甚于李渊缺马。完颜阿骨打起兵之时只有2500人，但仍只有少部分人用这个。错吧？金军缺乏甲胄，但是架不住有辽国这个运输大队长啊。出河店之战、黄龙府之战、布达岗之战的惨败，让辽国送给了女真人无尽的军事装备。那几仗打完，女真人真是要粮食有装备，要地盘有装备，要俘虏有装备，简直就是秦始皇跪一天赢麻了。连番的胜利也让东北各部前来投奔女真人，让金军的实力快速膨胀。特别是掌握了优秀手工业技术的渤海人的加盟，终于让金国拥有了组建大规模重装骑兵的武器技术。而且金国也不缺马。东北本来就是中国古代重要的养马地之一。前目中国历代政治得失中就曾说过，骑兵所需的马匹在中国只有2个地方出产，一在东北，一在西北。所谓冀北之野，即见热茶一带。东北又毗邻蒙古，可以轻松通过贸易获得战马。记录中，金国有47万，与唐玄宗开元盛世时期持平，有着较为充足的战马，比当时通辽的人口还多。要战马有装备，要装备有骑士，要骑士有战马，这还等着跟鼠标一圈一平骑兵部队成军有了吗？最终，北宋大臣范仲永在他的北记中记载了金军骑兵的强悍与强大。以从兄所信见，严寒寨有兵5万人，娄宿火井寨有兵1万人，皆蔷薇前行，皓月应援，人马皆全无。
Do you require an audience? The world is full of colors I have never seen before.
蜀火井寨有兵1万人，皆蔷薇前行，皓月应援，人马皆全附加。虽然金国的军事实力在战争中迅速膨胀，但由于地区资源有限，并不。
Why did the Silent King choose sleep over war? Contrary to popular belief, the Necrons didn't retreat into stasis because they were untouchable war gods who lost interest in conquest. After the brutal war in heaven, which saw the destruction of the Old Ones and the betrayal and dismantling of the Catan, the Necrons were left exhausted and fractured. Though victorious in a Pyrrhic sense, they no longer had the strength to face the rising Eldari, who had fought alongside the Old Ones and were rapidly ascending as the galaxy's dominant force. Sarek, the Silent King, recognized the bleak reality. The Necrons could not withstand the vengeful Eldar or the countless other the psychic races birthed by the Old One's legacy. With their bodies mechanical and their numbers finite, every Necron lost was irreplaceable. In contrast, the Eldar flourished, empowered by the warp and capable of devastating retribution. Rather than fight a losing war, the Silent King ordered his people into hibernation, betting on time to outlast their enemies. Time became their greatest weapon. As the Eldari reached their zenith, complacency set in. Their empire, immense and ancient, eventually fell to its own decadence. The Necrons did not choose slumber as a show of strength. They chose it because there was no other path to survival. Why did the Silent King choose sleep over war? Contrary to pop...
Now, Mark, let's look at a couple of original Chinese Dao. Here, Scholar Gladiatoris, over the years we've looked at various types of Chinese sword and Chinese other weapons. In fact, they're very, very interesting. Many different types of swords, and thankfully, largely thanks actually to LK Chen for sending me examples. We've had a lot of LK Chen swords over the years. This is the new way now. I think this has been updated now since this version. This is an earlier version, but this is essentially modelled on a Qing 19th century period, really kind of end of the 19th century and even into the early 20th century. So kind of from a European perspective, or should we say Western perspective, kind of Boxer rebellion period. These were around going back into the middle of the 19th century, but this kind of sort of relatively exaggerated shape really seems to become more common, more prevalent, more produced towards the end of the 19th century, as far as I've seen. Okay, so this is based really on the late 19th century and even into the early 20th century style of saber. Chinese saber is sometimes seen really correctly referred to as a Dao. A Dao is essentially any single-edged sword, and I believe the Dao is also a knife Chinese. So this is in contrast to the Jian, which we looked at in a recent video. So the Jian is a straight double-edged sword. Now, the Jian was still sometimes used as a military sword, even in the 19th century, but generally speaking, Dao or single-edged swords, really from the late Ming Dynasty onwards, the Dao really took over as the military sword, and the straight Jian, straight double-edged sword, was seen as a sort of gentleman's kind of dress sword, status sword, and even dueling sword, whereas this was seen as the military sword. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, China had various wars with various people in the 19th century and was using these swords, and they were still using swords into the 20th century. They were still issuing swords even in the Second World War for use against the Japanese invaders. So these sorts of swords, although they were essentially this type, the New Wei Dao is more or less known.
把我系统完了，我也马上我要下了。我知道这，我都刷牙了，我不行，我就刚念完佛了，我也。
19th century design, at least in the form you see here, they were still being made and issued in the 20th century. So I'm going to put this new one, New Wei Dao, down for a second. I might come back to it in a second. And we're going to look at a couple of originals. So here, essentially, is a real antique New Wei Dao. So this is a real old one that has come to me. Now you'll notice that it's a very, very similar shape to what you've just seen of the LK Chen. One thing I have to note is this is a little bit heavier, a little bit more blade heavy, a little bit less nimble, and it has a completely thick and really quite unflexible blade. Okay, so something we often see, particularly with the sort of kung fu versions, and I'll do this gingerly, not to say that the LK Chen is actually modeled on a historical original, but they tend to be very thin. Now, it's not to say that isn't historical. In fact, I've had an earlier 18th century Qing Dao, which was very flexible, and very often we'll talk about quality in a second, but very often we find the early ones aren't quite flexible. But by the time we get to the 19th century, particularly the end of the 19th century and into the sort of Boxer Rebellion period, they were churning out these swords for issuing to sort of mass-recruited troops. So these were mass-produced in their time, and they're not the best quality, in all honesty. This is actually quite a nice one, and I've had a few over the years. I've even done a video actually about one, and some of those have been horribly made. This is actually okay. This is probably also a civilian one, is my guess, because of the brass fittings. The Boxer Rebellion era ones, military ones, seem to have iron fittings, although you might disagree with that, so by all means post down below if you know more about that. But what I really wanted to say is these, shall we say, 19th century kind of mass-produced ones, they are absolutely intended as weapons, and they've got a decent edge on them, but they are much more clunky and heavy, and they really have more like a European falchion and even the heavier varieties of falchion. So these are big, old, beefy swords, and a lot of the movements you see in Chinese martial arts are designed for moving quite weighty blades around, and might look quite exaggerated from a sort of Western fencing perspective. But when you have a weapon like this in your hand, it really does move more like a sort of Viking-era sword or a falchion or a fairly heavy arming sword. That's what they're really comparable with. Now, the second sword I'm going to look at here is a Dadao. And this is a pretty cool thing, actually. It's got some nice detailing.
Accept your loss.
Pieces from the
It will be done. Indeed.
Around the guard section there.
At your beck and
I
call.
believe that particular style of wrapping might be associated with the Boxer Rebellion as well. And it's got a really interesting cross-section to the grip that's quite rectangular. It's more like a messer. And in fact, it's quite like a European messer in many, many ways. I mean, it doesn't have the
I'll
nozzle,
see to
but
it
that's about
personally.
it. In every other way, it's got a similar size, it's got a similar length hilt. The big noticeable difference, of course, is the ring pommel, which really is a typical Chinese feature which goes back 2,000 years, probably 2,500 years, into the hand dynasty. And this is a feature which we still see being made on Dadao, being manufactured and issued in the Second World War, in the 1930s and 40s. Absolutely incredible. But this is probably an example, I believe, from the 19th century. I need to do a bit more research on these. it could be early 20th century, but I think it's 19th century. So I
am
think,
not your
and these came from the
pet
same
monkey.
source, I think that these
it
are
serves
probably
your cause.
contemporary, and they were probably brought back by a British soldier or adventurer or traveller, probably
I am
at
not
the end
your
of the 19th century or
pet
the
monkey.
beginning of the 20th century. So really interesting examples. And the only thing I really wanted to add,
If I
funny enough,
must.
you might think the Dadao is, because they've got a reputation for being big old cleavers, it's more unwieldy than the in fact, the Dadao here is actually somewhat more wieldable, largely
I
because of
understand
where
your
the
intent.
balance is, because you've got like your hilt. But an interesting detail is that little guard there conflicts with my knuckle space. It's a little bit uncomfortable to hold, so I'm actually holding it further down. But anyway, what I really wanted to say was these 19th century Chinese swords are often relatively mass-produced and really quite blade-heavy by
Step
comparison
aside.
with most other
The
swords from
navigator is
most other
coming.
periods. They are great big choppers, and
Do
they are
not
very, very
dare
choppy, and are not as nimble as LKChen's
On it.
way down. However, there are examples, there are antique examples which are more like this out there, as I say.
I'll see to it personally.
And if you go back to the 17th and 18th century Qing examples, then indeed they tend to have thinner and lighter blades like this. Anyway, I hope that's been somewhat interesting.
Give
Not a
me
very in-depth
strength.
video, I know, but it's really cool to get my hands on two original, at least, relatively old, antique Chinese
I'm not
dynasty.
accustomed to being ordered around.
Dao. You went down, Dao. Thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matty's.
Me?
We'll speak.
If you insist, Lord Captain.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on.
I am a navigator, not a servitor.
Shattered foes in my wake. A wicked thought. Unpredictable downfall. What if...
My tactics are flawless. Already done. Nothing I can't do. Suits my purposes. Nothing I can't do. All too easy. Nothing I can't do. Opposing me with yours. Suits my purposes. Nothing of value has been lost. Nothing I can't do. Victory is imminent.
It's as good as done.
A wicked thought. Let's see.
I'll see to it personally.
Lord Captain!
Just a minor setback.
I am not your Xenos pet more. Another soul slips beyond the veil. If it serves your cause. I am not your Xenos pet monster. This tedium is beneath me.
I'm afraid not. Isn't this a job for the serfs?
High momentum.
No matter the cost. I will do my duty. Someone else can do this.
You don't frighten me!
I'm not accustomed to being ordered around. I'll paint your death in colors.
It will be done. An exemplary strike. At your beck and call. Let's take care of this one. Victory is imminent. At your beck and call. Indeed. At your beck and call. It will be done.
If I may.
Tried and tested tactics are the best ways.
Wicked thought. Schemes within schemes. Even I won't do that. Another one is shattered. Let's see. A maelstrom of madness. A deep, predictable downfall.
Not a problem for me. Nothing I can't do. All too easy. Suits my purposes. And nowhere to hide. Stand by that. Not a problem for me. Then your family has been lost. Nothing I can do. I'll bring glory to my bloodline.
Low momentum.
Watch and learn. Suits my purpose. There's nowhere to hide. Already done. Watch and learn. Suits my purpose. Opposing me was your biggest mistake. Not a problem for me. Another clean strike. Watch and learn. Pathetically sound approach. I will do my duty. It will be done. An exemplary strike. Victory is imminent. It will be done. Indeed.
Who, if not? Your end was inevitable. I refuse. On it.
I understand your intent. I deal death with my hands. I am not your Xenos pet, Morgan. If it serves your cause.
Be careful not to cross my gaze.
This tedium is beneath me. Another soul slips beyond the veil.
My ears are ringing.